This podcast is being recorded on the traditional ancestral stolen territories of the Stalo people, particularly the Achilits, Shiem, Kwakwaplit, Shwai, Squaw, Squiala, Suwali, Squokal, Chechkin, and Yakwi-Wiwus First Nation, and home of the Chilliwack Métis Association. Having a disability is very challenging. Yeah, you can overcome it, but some bosses don't understand it. I wish they would just give us a chance. Just because we have a disability does not mean that we can't do what other people can do. Sometimes I just want to cry.
It's not about finding the person, it's about training. We've had many situations where we hire people that drop off resumes, we train them for months and months, but then they don't show up. So it ends up feeling like a waste of money and time.
One of the reasons why I love my current job so much is because they are willing to invest in their people, right? You have good employers who are willing to invest in their people, build their skills internally, and that's great. And that really thrives. But when you don't have that and your employer is expecting you to keep up on skills on your own time and your own dime, it's really discouraging.
You know, what kind of support network do you have? Would be a common question that I would always ask new clients. And over the years that I do this job, it continually becomes less and less and less. Now most people's support networks are themselves.
From Free Rein Associates and Life Strategies, this is the Diversity Disconnect podcast. I'm Mallory Tomlinson. Episode 1. Rural Employer Seeks Perfect Employee Match. On April 5th, 2024, 3 members of the Diversity Disconnect research team load up a white Mazda 3 as the sun rises over the mountains. They are about to begin a 3-hour drive to the small rural community of Ashcroft, BC. Population, 1,600.
I was excited.
It was early.
It was early. I was sleepy.
I think going all the way back to the beginning, I remember being intrigued by Ashcroft, and because it was like, what's Ashcroft?
I feel like
none of us have heard of it, and it's by far our smallest community. And so there was a sense of like intrigue and curiosity about what we might encounter there, and also I remember thinking at the time that a community so small must be like they're really interconnected, and that there would be like everybody knows everybody, knows everything about everybody.
Yeah, it was like our first big like actual road trip, and I don't know, it was just like very exciting. We had a pep in our step. We're walking tall. This was like real deal. Like, let's head out. We've got to make the most of our time out here. And yeah, it was very, I don't know, interesting, almost surreal of like, oh, this is my job. Like, that's so cool.
Emily and Madeleine are the project's 2 research assistants. Both are in their early 20s and at the beginning stages of their careers. The pair has joined the team just 4 months prior.
Where I come from when looking for jobs is that like I am looking to help people, and I thought this was such a cool opportunity for that, to like kind of bridge the interest of research while also being that helping person. I also like share life experience, I guess, with the populations that we were looking at. I do self-identify as Indigenous, and while I don't have like that deep-rooted connection with like that heritage, I have grown up in quite a Indigenous-focused population as well, so like it didn't feel quite as a stretch for me to like feel like I could relate and bring in those insights. I have a research background a little bit. My schooling is in kinesiology, and for me, I always looked at it as like one of the only schooling degrees where every job that comes out of it is directed at helping people. Feels good to like know that you can go out there and make a difference, and I think that was something that like really like made me excited. Like I was sitting there like, oh, I hope I get the job. Like that'd be so cool. Imagine that. Like I get to go out on the town. Like, but yeah, no, it was very cool, especially as someone too that's grown up in a rural community. Like I get it. It is tough out there. So yeah.
I've said from the beginning of this project that I have a vested interest in making change. I am a person born with a disability, and mainly it affects me physically. As I became an adult, I realized how very broken the systems were that I was meant to engage in. When you turn 17 and a half, you're kind of pushed out into the adult world, and it's very different. You grow up as a kid being told, like, there's nothing you can't do. And you can feel that way and, like, cultivate that in yourself, but then as soon as you're in the adult world, it's very different, and you're faced with these systems that you have really no say or control over. When this opportunity came my way, it felt like my best chance, and honestly kind of my last hope to use the knowledge and experience I have to further the work of improving employment opportunities for underrepresented people and people that have had experiences like myself.
Diversity Disconnect truly started in February 2022 during a meeting between Free Rein Associates and Life Strategies. The Government of Canada had recently updated their Essential Skills Framework to the new Skills for Success model. Advancements in automation, artificial intelligence, and other technologies had caused significant shifts in the Canadian workplace, labour market, and economy. Employers were facing challenges in finding workers with the right combination of social-emotional skills, digital skills, and literacy skills. It became clear that a modernized skills framework was needed, one that was responsive to a changing world, that provides consistent language, and one that builds a common understanding of what these core skills are and how they are used in the workforce. From this, the Skills for Success framework was born. 9 skills were identified as those needed to participate and thrive in learning, work, and life. In January 2022, Employment and Social Development Canada issued a call for proposals to fund projects conducting research to identify better ways of helping persons prepared for, return to, or maintain employment that would also support the skills development of Canadian adults under the Skills for Success model. With the modernized skills framework in mind, Free Rein Director Peter Bailey saw an opportunity to explore a problem he had long observed in his rural community.
Free Rein has provided employment services in Hope, British Columbia for over 30 years. Having worked with hundreds of clients in that time, Peter noticed a troubling pattern happening for community members who experienced different barriers or forms of marginalization. He knew that these communities already saw higher rates of unemployment, but he was also noticing these communities seemed to experience greater difficulties in maintaining employment and passing the 3-month mark, the traditional probationary period.
That being said, the labor market had shifted greatly in 2021 to 2022. Free Rein was beginning to hear from more and more employers seeking support in finding staff. Unemployment had dropped to 4.5% in Canada, and in Hope, it seemed as though everyone was looking for workers.
And so the question became, why aren't these employers who are struggling to find staff hiring those who experience a form of marginalization?
And if they do hire someone experiencing barriers due to marginalization, what factors contribute to employment success?
Then finally, how can the Skills for Success model improve employment outcomes in these situations, particularly in rural communities?
From here, the project began to take shape and a research plan was developed. Diversity Disconnect would explore the helping and hindering factors in job acquisition and employment maintenance for underrepresented groups in rural communities. The team would focus their efforts on job seekers and employees who self-identified as Indigenous or a person experiencing a disabling condition, as well as rural employers and service providers. Over the course of 5 months, the team heard from over 150 people living in the BC communities of Hope, Agassiz, Ashcroft, Merritt, and Princeton. They heard stories of folks who have experienced challenges in their workplaces or who have struggled to find employment, as well as employers and service providers who are trying to navigate the landscape of creating inclusive spaces in rural communities. We will be sharing the stories, experiences, and wisdom of the folks who spoke with our team in this podcast. By sharing their voices and their wisdom, we hope you will gain new understanding of how diversity impacts and influences employment. However, the confidentiality and privacy of all of our research participants is pivotal. So, throughout the podcast, you'll hear the stories of 4 people: Jordan, Shane, George, and Alex. These people don't exist as individuals and are being brought to life by voice actors. They're composites, integrating the real stories and quotes of those who participated in the Diversity Disconnect research. Some details will have been changed or modified, whether it's to protect the identity of a research participant or to help with story continuity. As characters, they represent the voices of the people who took the time to share their experiences and the vulnerability and trust they gave our team.
And we are just so very grateful to everyone.
In a small town, you have to be good at being entrepreneurial. You have to be a little bit of a visionary. You just have to. We often see these shiny, super fun, good services in bigger cities, services that we don't have. So you need an attitude of, well, what are you going to do about it? You have to be a bit patient and resourceful. Lord knows you have to be resourceful.
Jordan is a 28-year-old single mom who has lived in her small community her entire life. One of those communities where everyone knows everything about you. She was diagnosed with a mental health challenge as a teen. Her chronic pain began in her early 20s, eventually leading to a lupus diagnosis. After graduating high school, Jordan joined her municipality's road maintenance team and has worked manual labor jobs ever since.
I've always been able to find work, but I've struggled to find opportunities for growth. For years, I've moved from one team to another, but never really moved up. When you live in a town as small as this, people hold on to those management roles because there's nowhere else to go. They retire them out, and I would say in our community, we have such stale management. And I mean, it's brutal. Zero commitment to policy change, zero commitment for training for an inclusive environment, no commitment to change, basically. Don't see it, don't want to see it, never want to see it, don't want to talk about it. I know I could be a good team leader, but I haven't had the chance to show it. If you have a disability, they should give you a chance to prove that you can do it, but those opportunities feel so rare.
Jordan's desire to be given a chance to prove herself was a common factor for our research participants. Whether they were a job seeker, employee, employer, or service provider, everyone shared that same desire for opportunity.
Sometimes you feel a little bit helpless when you know how somebody presents and they come to you full of hope. I'll try and reach out to employers, but you just don't know where the opportunity can be for them.
Alex is a service provider in rural BC. While their main priority may be in supporting people experiencing multiple barriers find and maintain employment, they've found they must be a jack-of-all-trades service provider due to support gaps in the community.
You gotta get them in the door first, but it's gotta start with the employer having a bit fuller of an understanding of some of the different work styles, learning styles, communication styles of people, you know? If that foundation isn't there, then neither the employee or the employer are being given the right opportunity to make the relationship work.
Interestingly enough, opportunities was one of those success factors that really stuck out for me when I was looking at the data, simply because I had the opportunity to sit in on one particular focus group, and the way that the participants spoke to, just give me an opportunity, just give me an opportunity.
Cassie Taylor is the managing director at Life Strategies and another member of the Diversity Disconnect research team.
And in this case, the participant was an individual job seeker who was just really, really motivated, but just lacking a space to really be able to illustrate to an employer that they did have the skills, the knowledge, the abilities that were necessary for being successful in work, but they were just lacking that space to actually prove themselves almost.
The research team identified a total of 20 factors that impact the workplace success of individuals.
It's important to remember that when we're talking about success factors, we're not just talking about the skills that an individual holds. We're talking about the success factors that are present within a workplace. We're talking about the success factors that are present within their communities and how those factors either facilitate employment success or constrain employment success. And that's a really unpredictable, dynamic process that requires a deep dive. So that would be one thing. Sometimes these factors, when they're present, they can really help or facilitate the success of an individual, a workplace, a community. But the flip side of that is there could be negatives within those spaces as well that really work to constrain. I think the other piece that I'll add is that for the Diversity Disconnect project in particular, there is a shared understanding that's necessary across these success factors. Like, are we all talking about the same things when we look at it? And also there's a bit of a disconnect when we think about who's at fault, right? Is it a skill or attribute that's missing from the individual? And often training programs have been really focused on the individual and interventions with the individual. But there could also be these factors that are just not present in a workplace. And so workplaces also need supports and funding and success to help get these success factors going. But communities too, right? It's not just community service agencies, it's local governments, it's various different societies, because we know when we're looking at success factors for employment, especially of underrepresented people, it's not just like employability factors. It's not necessarily a skill that they're lacking for a job opening that's there. There could be lots of pre-employability things that really land more on the community side of things than the employer. So do they have transportation? And do they have work boots, right? Those things are really tangible that community services can help really support people to get. But also, friends or family members or others in the community, maybe they're getting drives to work on a regular basis. Maybe their auntie is providing childcare. And so I really would want us to take a really broad swath when we're looking at success factors.
As we go through the stories of Jordan, Shane, George, and Alex, we'll be exploring the role each success factor plays in their lives.
If I had a wish list, it's got to start from the leadership down. I would put the leaders through leadership training.
When it comes to Indigenous-specific hiring, there's actually no such thing as a recruitment problem. It's actually a training problem. That's the root cause.
I think sometimes employers put way too much on education. They really do. They don't stop and realize there's more to life than education, and there's a lot of people out there, including myself, but a lot of people that have so much to offer with life skills, right? That they've learned throughout the years.
Job descriptions are often described as wish list items, the skills, knowledge, and traits you want your future employee to have in order to provide you with the best work possible. And in a perfect world, the living embodiment of that very wish list would walk through an employer's doors. But it's far more likely the candidate you will hire will come with some of those desired skills and knowledge, but need to learn some of the others. All Canadians benefit from continuous training and learning. In fact, the Employment and Social Development Canada Future Skills Council November 2020 report highlights the importance of accessible learning, stating, "As we imagine a future that will be different in innumerable ways, Canada must continue to build a learning nation. A learning nation, as we see it, is people who share a common understanding that to achieve prosperity for individuals, households, and communities, we must prioritize learning throughout our lives. It is integral in a context of rapid and continuous change and flux to ensure economic competitiveness and sustainability." For Alex, how we prepare Canada's workforce begins in high school.
We don't give students the opportunity to explore their abilities and interests. We don't have a young entrepreneur program. We don't have, a skill program in our schools. We don't have any of that stuff happening to find out what kids are actually good at, At least when I was in school, we had all these different electives to try to find out who we wanted to be. And they keep paring that shit down because it'll cost money and, they don't want to put the money into it, especially not in the rural regions. Well, if we don't put money into our kids, what the hell kind of future do we have? It feels like the school system is failing. Let's be honest, the school systems that we have in North America were created to build workers, right? I mean, we took the Henry Ford model of assembly line manufacturing and we applied it to the schools to make workers. But part of that system is testing where your workers should be. And in rural communities, we've ignored that. It's like we're just going to focus on one thing, and that's, can we get them to graduate?
So training and learning was interesting because we, again, were taking a really broad look at what is considered training and learning. Things like formalized education, certificates, or degrees, like those are certainly included in training and education, but aren't necessarily what we're privileging. We wanted to look at training and education across all areas. So whether that's in like formalized education settings, or it's a certificate that someone's taken, like a WMIS training or something like that, like those kinds of certificates, or, you know, Indigenous ways of knowing, right? There's a whole swath of life experiences that we're just not good at recognizing. And I think we're doing a bit of a disservice for not supporting individuals to have the language they need to demonstrate the skills that they possess outside of a formal certificate or degree.
The idea of recognizing and respecting different ways of learning was particularly emphasized by Indigenous research participants.
Indigenous culture is very big on that storytelling communication, and that's how they learn, and that's how they gain their knowledge. It is passed on. They don't go to like traditional schooling for a lot of things, and I think valuing that life experience from employers is something that's huge when it comes to the training and learning aspect. Just understanding too that because there's this like cultural difference, that the ways of training and learning might need to be different, right? And that's applies to everybody.
Shane is a 59-year-old Indigenous woman with deep ties to her community. Today, she works at the Cultural Center located on her reserve, but Shane has a diverse resume including work in teaching, nonprofit, healthcare, and even a short stint at a mechanics. Shane's path of learning and acquiring knowledge was quite unique and not always simple. Canada's history of residential schools and discrimination towards Indigenous communities and ways of living ultimately created a number of barriers starting in Shane's early years.
In one way, I certainly faced challenges due to lack of education. Yeah, I was taken out of school when I was 12. I had to look after my brothers. Welfare workers actually put me in charge of my brothers at that time, and I did that until I was 17. Most of the group homes were very abusive, so the government worker said to me, I could put you all into homes, but I'd have to split you all up. None of you would probably ever see each other during that time until you're of age. And so, yeah, I took over the responsibility. It was the best option for everybody in the family, except me, yeah.
But Shane never stopped pursuing knowledge.
My resume says that I have a master's in the Bachelor of Traditional Knowledge. Nobody here in any place is going to give me that. No school. My mother gave me that credit when I was quite a bit younger because my knowledge is not limited to Western ways of thinking. We also have elders who bring knowledge and other different sets of elders. There's the bingo elders and there's the grandma elders, and then there's the traditional elders. I'm a traditional elder because I've done everything. There's nothing that I haven't done. So when you're looking at that, that's a type of education. My teachers are on my resume. My mother is the first one. Then my other teachers are on the next line. So when you look at it, I say, well, you can't take that away, you know? Nobody can take that away. And then if they're not going to recognize that knowledge, then there's something going to be wrong with that.
So many people we spoke with clearly had immense knowledge on a variety of subjects. Knowledge they acquired through life experience or the specific challenges they faced. But because this knowledge couldn't be supported with a university degree, our research participants often felt dismissed by employers. They often wondered why, if the knowledge was there, it mattered where it came from.
My daughter has special needs, so in the last year, I have been called to go pick her up early a few times. I'm a single parent, so I have to leave the job to go pick her up. Finding an employer that understands this is next to impossible.
I tried to kind of sell different industries on hiring persons with disabilities, and the door was very quickly shut. Mostly around safety concerns and because of places being a heavy industrial environment. It's not smooth ground, it's dirty. It's, they had a lot of their reasons to say no before a conversation began.
And I'm finding that in smaller towns, it's older buildings and stuff like that. They've been kind of grandfathered in when it shouldn't necessarily be that way. I think that one of my biggest steps, we had to really work hard on the bathroom situation and having that accessibility, because I do like allowing people access to the bathroom, because if you have to go to the bathroom, you have to go to the bathroom. It's a need, not a want.
So accessibility and accommodation came up a lot in your research, and from my understanding, it was a challenge that you often faced yourselves. What accessibility challenge would you run into when you were in these communities?
Yes.
Simple answer.
Yes.
I think I'll say this to anybody: I can make things work, and I'm adaptable, and
we really did that.
and we adapted. I'm blessed. I have the physical ability to make things work. I can get out of my chair. I can kind of just do what needs to be done, and sometimes it hurts me, but I can do it in the moment. And so I think that's why I felt pretty confident going into this work that it wouldn't be anything catastrophic. Like, I can just make things work. But we're dealing with in rural communities, rural and remote communities, with limited infrastructure, old infrastructure, buildings that have not been updated. And yeah, my wheelchair itself took some hits. I needed the maintenance. I dropped some bolts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really lucky I didn't get a flat tire, which is great, because that has happened.
For me personally, I think one of the things that stood out a lot was that, most often, either people just aren't aware that it's not accessible, or they're really trying, they just don't have the resources. Businesses and employers, they are trying their best when they know how. It's just much, much harder than it would be in an urban center.
It wasn't just the research team's experience that highlighted the importance of accessible communities. Whether you're an employer, employee, or service provider, being able to access your community every day has a huge impact on your ability to participate and thrive in daily life. George is an employer in his rural community, a 20-minute drive off the main highway. When the research team spoke with George, he took some time to reflect on his community's accessibility in general, and the more he thought about it, the more challenges he began to see.
It's not an easy community to get around as a visually impaired person. I can't even imagine with a mobility issue. It's just not designed that way. And I know that there are people who have walkers, scooters, wheelchairs, canes, and they just can't go anywhere. So a lot of times their basic services come to them with grocery delivery or home health care. That's isolating. Or if you have kids, if you want to go to the park with your child and your child has a mobility device, you're not going. It's all pea gravel. How are you going to do that? It's just not accessible. And I think that keeps a lot of people home.
If I didn't have to go out, I wouldn't. Because in my home, I'm not disabled. The minute I leave my front door, I'm completely disabled. Completely.
Talk to us about accessibility and accountability. How do we define that in the research?
Because we were considering such a wide set of underrepresented individuals, this could be accommodation needs that are related to physical disabilities, so mobility or visual or whatever it might be. But it also is sort of different ways of operating in the world, like neurodivergent. It could be the color of someone's skin or their gender identity or a whole host of other things. When we consider accommodations, it's more of a question about what do you need to do this job effectively? And I think that question should be posed to all workers.
If there was one thing you most wanted an employer to understand about accessibility and accommodation, what would that be?
Sometimes it's not that difficult. Yeah. I know there's a lot of things that are these big renovations, big ticket items, big things. Sometimes though, it's something very small, simple.
Trying to be innovative where you can, and maybe asking questions. Just doing what you can with the resources you have is, I think, valuable.
When we consider accommodations, those kinds of accommodations need to be really flexible, because what works for one particular group may not work for another. But even further still, if you're looking at one person who's Indigenous, for example, the kind of accommodation they might need might not be the same as another person who also is Indigenous. We just can't assume that what worked for one person works for another.
Flexibility can help strengthen an employer-employee relationship where cultural differences may be a factor.
My previous employer was pretty flexible in their culture. There's times where I'd have to book off at least 4 days or a week just to be where I have to be. There's a lot of death in our families because we consider family to be, it's just extended and huge. And when there is death, the whole community, a large majority of the nation sometimes, will come together for ceremony and take part in long-established traditions. Traditions that existed before colonization. It's rare to find an employer who understands and respects our ways of living and afford us the time off we need.
Time flexibility was a common theme among those we spoke with, employees and employers alike. Those who experienced disabling conditions desired flexibility for medical appointments and fluctuations in their health, and employers appreciate staff flexibility in adapting to unexpected bumps along the road.
I've become more open with my scheduling. Like, if my employee has something that she has to do and I can cover it, it's good just to help her because she helps me when I need her to, and it goes both ways. I don't mind if someone tells me I can't make it and takes a day off and have something to do or have a doctor's appointment. When I give them that flexibility, they give me flexibility in return.
And employers that found success through flexibility also recognized its importance in recruitment.
Since everybody has a unique story, it's important to success to recognize that. Your recruitment process must be adaptable to the needs at the moment in time. I've hired a lot of single mums for temporary jobs that needed to be done. I know many in the community who are struggling financially and can only work some weird hours and stuff like that. So anytime I've offered them work, it's been during school hours so that they're available to do it. It's an easy adjustment for me to make that helps them immensely.
Flexibility was another success factor identified in the research, but it's also something that's present when discussing accessibility and accommodation. What's the difference between the two?
I'm not sure that there is a difference between the two, right? Flexibility came up in a lot of different success factors. Flexibility and an opportunity, part-time, full-time, on-call work, all those kinds of things. Flexibility in education and training. But flexibility is just this dynamic approach. And so it could exist across a wide variety of these success factors. The need to be adaptable and flexible is actually a core skill for success that came out of the Government of Canada's work, transitioning out of essential skills. So adaptability is a foundational skill necessary for being successful in work, learning, and in life. It's a building block to acquire other higher level skills. And so it's one of those pieces that kind of exists in all spaces. But in terms of a dedicated skills for success, it's that notion that flexibility can enable an employer, for example, to offer customized or creative, innovative solutions, and even for individuals to offer innovative solutions because they're going around operating in a world that's not built for them. Mm-hmm. Systems aren't built for them, whether that's tangible spaces or like the way work is structured isn't built for them. So these are individuals that know how to be flexible. And so they can really identify, oh, that's a pain point for you. Oh, here's a good solution, because they're very good at figuring their way through problems in spaces. And so I think that is one of the pieces that makes flexibility as a success factor itself a little bit different, that it has its fingers in all sorts of different spaces.
Finding that right employer-employee match can often feel like playing the dating game. Your resume often offers that first impression, an opportunity to create that first spark. But like some romance stories, the right match can be found through the connections you have in your network. In rural communities, the relationships you build with people will follow you for life.
You have to be very, very sort of gentle with the relationships because it's so small. You have to be good at relationships. And some jobs are invisible because they will never hit a job board, right? The hidden job market. Even if it's available, it's still hidden. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Just recently, I had a new colleague in the job for maybe 3 weeks, and they were ready to quit. Young kid. I had to sit them down and say, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. And I know it sucks and it's hard, but if you quit, that's going to spread around that you quit after 3 weeks, like lightning. It's your first job in the community. Tough it out.
So at its core, connections is really about relationships. And those relationships can exist between individuals themselves. They can exist between individuals and workplaces. They can exist between workplaces and workplaces, communities and workplaces, communities and individuals. Like it's across all of these different stakeholder groups.
My name is Desiree Carlson. I am working with life strategies as a transcultural counseling specialist. I think it's just breaking that script.
Yeah.
I think it's about not following a script and about being interested in who is this other person. And I think we're walking in the world just not seeing others.
Yeah.
And it seems so obvious.
Particularly for people who experience disabling conditions or Indigenous peoples, connections play an important role in employment maintenance as well.
Having worked in community support for most of their life, Alex has begun to witness a concerning trend when it comes to our social connections, especially for those who face barriers.
It's particularly challenging when you do have disabilities or addictions or anything like that because you don't have that support network. But now it's across the board. Social isolation is becoming increasingly more common. And the problem is that then leads to stress, which leads to chronic stress, which leads to inability to achieve that work-life balance, which leads to then unemployment because your mental health suffered to the point where you can't maintain your employment. So it becomes a vicious cycle. I have examples of when community connections were strong and it allowed somebody to obtain employment because we're able to utilize that. When there's a support person, when there's a support network around a person, that makes their employability much stronger. They have people that they can lean on, people that they can connect with, people that they can talk to. You know, if their car blows a tire, they have somebody who can give them a ride to work. But if you don't have those strong support connections, when you feel like you're all by yourself against the world, that's really hard.
No matter your industry or what role you're in, we all do better when we have a support network behind us. What I think employers could benefit from doing when they hire a new team member is to reflect on what connections your new hire needs to succeed and help facilitate any connections that may be missing. Employers can also ask themselves and their teams what connections they themselves would personally benefit from to create a more inclusive workplace.
And on the flip side, job seekers and employees need to maintain their personal connections and be mindful of their reputation within community.
There were several people we spoke with who also felt that if their employers had stronger connections within the community, particularly within their local Indigenous communities, it would help foster greater understanding and empathy between the two parties. In our conversations, we noticed that the more connected the community was with each other, between its residents, businesses, and service providers, the stronger the overall health of the community seemed to be.
From recruitment to retention, a lot of employment success hinges on the relationship built between the employer and the employee. Workplaces that open up opportunities to their teams may find themselves surprised by the vast capabilities of their staff or potential new hires. Recognizing different ways of learning and supporting your teams in accessing training to help them succeed cultivates a diverse wealth of knowledge for your organization. Building community connections and developing strong relations help all of us overcome the challenges we face in our lives. We must remember that creating accessible spaces, both within our workplaces and within our towns, allow for all members of our community to participate in learning, work, and life. It is helpful to have accessibility and accommodation needs rooted in flexibility and understanding. In fact, where present, flexibility helped foster customized, creative, and innovative solutions rooted in an awareness and understanding of the strengths and challenges present. Next time on the Diversity Disconnect podcast.
creativity and innovation is a huge part of everyday life for, people with physical disabilities, neurodivergence.
So when communication isn't present, you're probably going to see poor work outcomes, right?
When you ask your staff to be part of the business, they're more invested in its outcomes.
Without reliable communication access, it's very hard to get out of the cycle of poverty.
The only reason I found out about the program that really helped me get back on my feet was because I knew the right person.
The way that we collaborate with each other, we impact each other.
Employers see that and think, oh, well, they're all quote unquote bad workers, or they have a bad work ethic. But that actually could be just a side effect of a larger issue.
I am privileged to live, work, and raise my family on the traditional, unceded, and stolen territory of the Stalo people. As a proud Cree woman who has faced loss of culture due to colonization, I strive to learn more about my own Indigenous culture while raising up the voices of the Indigenous people in my community.
Diversity Disconnect is funded by the Government of Canada. To learn more about the research, visit freereignassociates.ca/diversity-disconnect or check out the links in our show notes. The Diversity Disconnect podcast is hosted by Mallory Tomlinson and produced by Megan Boekhorst. Our audio engineer is Tim McAlpine. Guests include Desiree Carlson, Cassie Taylor, Madeleine Warkentin, and Emily White. This episode featured Megan Boekhorst as Jordan, Diana King as Shane, Peter Bailey as George, and Harmony Toth as Alex. The Diversity Disconnect podcast was developed by Free Reign Associates and Life Strategies.